Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. My name's Jez Rutter. As you all have seen, this session is being recorded, just to make sure really that we're able to respond to questions that we're hoping that you're going to answer during the webinar, such that we can respond with information back to you afterwards on all the questions and any answers. I shall introduce the speakers shortly, but just to let you know that we've planned 10 minutes for question and answers at the end, but you can ask questions through the question and answer function that you'll see at the bottom of the screen on the toolbar. And as I say, we'll be emailing answers to all the questions out to everyone afterwards if we don't get round to answering them all. So next slide, please. So you've got hopefully some very good speakers today with different insights and background. There is one change to the setup in that Vodafone have only as of yesterday actually put in a new policy where the only people that can speak externally is the CEO, CFO. So unfortunately, Paul Garland isn't able to present, but I will give an update on the position at Vodafone, but unfortunately without the slides that Paul had done. So we'll see presentations today from Carol, Andrew, Angela, and Gavin. So on to the next slide, please. So this is in essence the subjects that we'll be covering, giving ideally a sort of all-round appreciation in terms of net zero, behaviour change, and how important it is. And very shortly, I'll be coming on to talking through my introduction. Next slide, please. And again. So as I say, welcome. First of all, net zero is a UK government commitment. The UK actually was the first to announce net zero greenhouse gas by 2050. It covers all greenhouse gases. So just for clarity, that's CO2, methane, nitrous oxides, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. It also covers scopes 1, 2, and 3. So scope 1 is direct emissions, such as gas and oil used on the site. Scope 2 covers indirect emissions, for example, purchased electricity. And scope 3 covers all other indirect emissions that occur in a company's value chain, quite often the largest component, in fact. And it includes both upstream and downstream emissions. Every sector is having to determine what this means in practice. So changing the way things are done to get to net zero means systematic change. So behaviour change is essential as part of this, and we'll be exploring why behaviour change is such a significant part of this solution. Next slide, please. It's recognised that non-consumption has a key part to play. Non-consumption and non-use, indeed, not just to reduce what is used, but also to prevent the infrastructure required for that use. I founded and have driven the ENCO initiative, that's the Energy Conscious Organisation initiative, as chair of the Independent Energy Consultants Group within ESTA over the last 3 years. But the principles of ENCO apply equally to net zero as a whole. From case studies and evidence from the Climate Change Committee, the initiative, which is a joint initiative between ESTA and the Energy Institute, we've developed an extensive business case that outlines that behavior change represents a massive 50% of the available energy and sustainability improvements potential. And furthermore, and very significantly, this is one area that is largely untapped. So actually, I describe it as the new low-hanging fruit. For sure, if you dabble with behavior change programs, don't be surprised that you can't measure the results. Really, a behavior change program needs to be a holistic one, covering many areas progressively or at the same time. So it's a root and branch approach, and it's not just about individual people doing things to improve, which, as important as that is, to make an impact, it needs to be a holistic program. Next slide, please. So behavior change needs to be embedded in procedures. I've got lots of P's here: procedures, policies, processes, procurement, projects, performance, practice, like training and coaching. And facilitation skills are key. And to get there needs a net zero roadmap and an ability to convince boards to invest in holistic behavior change programs. So during the rest of the webinar, and I'm going to be handing over shortly, we'll be covering who should be involved in a net zero plan, some examples, and some very good examples indeed of what a program should involve, and also examples of how to encourage people to change. So I trust that you enjoy the webinar, and I'd now like to introduce Andrew Shine from the Behavioural Insights team, who we're currently working alongside on one project. So over to you, Andrew.
Thanks a lot, Jess. Next slide, please. Today, I just want to talk through a couple examples of interesting projects that Behavioral Insights team has been involved in. I hope to get the creative juices flowing in the rest of the panel and all attendees. Next slide, please. So before we start, I just want to play a little game to sort of get everyone woken up this morning. And you'll see my definition of game is a little bit different from yours. So first, I want you to think about whether Mahatma Gandhi was older or younger than 94 years when he died. So if you could write down on a little piece of paper or just record it on your phone, whether you think he was older or younger than 94 years old when he died. And once you've done that, can you also write down how old you think he was when he died? So again, write it down on a little piece of paper or on your phone. Next slide, please. And now let's do something similar for Frank Sinatra. So if you can write down first whether Frank Sinatra was older or younger than 52 years when he died. So just write down older or younger for Frank, maybe on your phone or on a piece of paper. And then next, if you could write down how old you think Frank Sinatra was when he died. And I think the audience probably knows what I'm leading towards. But if you compare the number that you wrote down for how old you thought Frank Sinatra was when he died versus how old Gandhi was when he died, I think you probably got Frank Sinatra dying a little bit younger. But if we go to the next slide, please. It turns out Frank Sinatra lived two years longer than Gandhi. And the reason that, although I'm not going to take a show of hands here as we're all virtual, the reason I think that it's likely that a majority sort of got this question wrong is because of the really strong, consistent effect of anchoring. Anchoring is one of the original sort of insights from, the behavioral economist, psychologist kind of camp, showing that people deviate from what we think of as rational cognition. And one way to do that is to anchor them to a number. You can actually do this. It's so consistent. It's an effect that replicates in so many different contexts. It's really wonderful. You can ask people to think about the last 2 digits of their social security number or their national insurance number. And it turns out that even that ends up anchoring people to the answers they give to an unrelated question. And that's what's happening here. And the reason for that is that numbers are hard, numbers are abstract. And so the mind, it makes shortcuts. And sometimes the shortcut that it makes is, okay, well, 94 years old, that's too old. Let me kind of backtrack from that and kind of come away from that a little bit. 52 years old, that seems a little young. Let me inflate that a little bit. But you sort of don't inflate enough, as it were, to the answer you would have given if you hadn't been anchored. So next slide, please. So DIT is a big fan of Danny Kahneman. He has a popular book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks about this way of thinking about a lot of behavioral insights as reflecting a brain where there's sort of like a fast system, that's the automatic, intuitive, and effortless system, and the slow system, which is the reflective and deliberate and analytic system. And often we're designing policies or products or services thinking that people can engage with them using their slow brain, but they end up engaging with them in some way or another using their fast brain, where they make some intuitive judgments without even necessarily realizing that they're doing that. And that's one of the reasons that we think that environmental context and the way that services are designed and their context matters so much in terms of outcomes. Next slide, please. So we've come up with a framework to help policymakers and product and service designers think about using behavioral insights. It's this EAST framework, so making things easy, attractive, social, and timely. I'm just going to talk about 2 examples today. Next slide, please. The first one is making things easy. Next slide, please. So we worked with a retailer in Australia called PowerShop. And in Australia, they're trying to reduce peak demand, especially on hot days when everyone's using their air conditioner. And so retailers are trying innovative programs. For example, PowerShop has this Curb Your Power program where they pay people $10 if they reduce their power sufficiently during a peak demand event. Next slide, please. And we came up with lots of sort of different ways of sort of general way that the Curb Your Power service worked, including sort of the opt-in text and the way that sort of PowerShop motivated people to, can everyone hear me, by the way? I just got a note that my internet connection's unstable. I'll turn off my video if that's helpful.
It's fine.
Okay, and so we changed the recruitment email, we changed the heads up SMS. If you go to the next slide, please, you'll see a few of the things that we tried, including a prize draw instead of a regular $10. So it's, instead of getting a definite $10, it was getting the opportunity to win $5,000. But the most important thing that we did, as it turned out, was also had a treatment arm where we didn't have an opt-in email at all. And we just defaulted people to be part of the Curb Your Power program. Next slide, please. And it turns out that the changes that we made to the opt-in email and to the heads up text, they didn't move the needle very much, but having this smart default where people were automatically defaulted into the Curb Your Power group had a big, big effect. If you could go to the next slide, please. And part of that is driven by the fact that obviously when you don't force people to opt in, you get much higher compliance, as you can see in the first graph. But I want to draw your attention to the second graph, which indicates that the people in the default group, they actually were saving more on average than the people who had opted in. And that's a bit of a counterintuitive result, because you would have thought that the people who opted in would be the ones who are saving the most. But it turns out that the people who are opting in tended to have already made changes to their homes that made it harder for them to reduce their peak demand. For example, their homes were more energy efficient. Whereas the people who wouldn't necessarily opt into this program, but when they received this text out of the blue, they decided, yeah, I could actually reduce my power. They actually had more low-hanging fruit that they could grab to reduce their power. And so the lesson that we drew there is just the importance of making things easy, because sometimes these smart defaults capture the most important sort of like parts of the audience, if you will. Next slide, please. And then with my last sort of 2 minutes, I just wanted to also talk about the importance of making things social. I think this is appreciated, but still underrated by policymakers. If next slide, please. So one of the things that I think is important to recognize is that we know there are increasing returns to scale on the supply side of lots of low carbon technologies and fuels, because of the learning by doing phenomenon that we're well aware of. But I think a key behavioral insight that, as I say, is still underrated is that there are increasing returns to scale on the demand side too. And that's because demand is contagious. Next slide, please. And so what I mean by that is that, for example, with solar panels, turns out that lots of good research shows that the clustering of solar panels on specific streets and specific neighborhoods is not just because of characteristics of those streets and neighborhoods, but just because neighbors are seeing their neighbors put up solar panels and are inspired or jealous or feel sort of like just get the idea, oh, a solar panel is a good idea, I'm going to do it too. So you get this contagion effect. And I think one really cool set of research that kind of like is the proof that this is a social contagion story is that the more visible the solar panels, the more contagious they tend to be. Next slide, please. And so I think the government should think about making low carbon technologies as salient and noticeable as possible. And I've put a picture of an early ad for the iPod here. And the iPod, if everyone remembers, was kind of this garish white. And the headphones for it were this garish white as well. And the ads for it emphasized the garishness of the white of the iPhone and the headphones. Why? Why was the white so important? And the reason was it made it really salient. And my suspicion is that it increased people's estimation of the prevalence of their friends buying and using iPhones. And I think we should do the same thing with low carbon technologies, basically. This is just an idea, but for example, electric cars, we should make them really salient and noticeable with green license plates. Low carbon homes, we should make them really salient and noticeable with open houses. And I've always thought, actually, when you're creating a low carbon home, for example, installing a heat pump, it'd be so fantastic to make the building site itself really attractive and educational. Next slide, please. And so I think the government thinks a lot about clusters on the production side. And I think it would also be interesting to think about clusters on the demand side. Next slide, please. I think that's actually the end, but so I just sort of wanted to give those two examples, one about making things easy and the other just some ideas to make things social to kind of kick off this webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very interesting. So we'll now go on to our next speaker on the next slide, please.
Okay, thank you, Jez. Next slide, please. And thank you to Andrew for that. I'm going to build on some of Andrew's observations and insights there. So next slide. Just going back a little bit to the theory in terms of how you make these things work, make them real for people in their working environment. The incentives and disincentives component, in fact, that Andrew's talked about the psychology of that to a degree in terms of how people respond to the influences around them. But if you want people to change what they do, then you need to understand why they have done what they have done historically, as well as understanding what's going to make them do the new things that you want them to do. And of course, it's not necessary to make a complete move from the old to the new overnight. You're all familiar with nudge theory, we've just heard it talked about. So you can move people incrementally. It doesn't necessarily all need to be done in one go. However, if there is a transition that you want to achieve, then you need to manage the transition as much as you manage the new behavior and the maintenance of the new behavior. If you want to know what people actually think is valuable and what motivates them, obviously the best way of doing it is to ask them. And whilst this is not to do with energy, it's a broader environmental example. There was some work undertaken in an American fast food chain a few years ago, which was written up in an academic paper, which you'll be able to find, where the owners of the business wanted to engage their customers in environmental behaviors. But actually it turned out that what their customers primarily wanted was friendly and efficient staff. They wanted the food that they ordered to be actually to be reflected in what arrived, and they wanted service to be quick. Now, it turned out that none of the things that the management of the business had tried to introduce assisted with those aims, and so it failed with the customers. However, it did motivate the staff, and it ended up with the staff engaging with some of the initiatives rather than the customers. The outcome of that was more motivated staff. An outcome of more motivation was better staff retention, and those of you familiar with the hospitality and food service sector will know that staff turnovers in excess of 100% per year are not uncommon. So with a high turnover, you don't necessarily always get experienced staff. The improvement in motivation and the reduction in turnover meant that you ended up with staff who were better familiar with their jobs, which meant that the customers ended up getting what they wanted, which was the right food, cooked the right way by somebody who knew what they were doing. So there was a knock-on impact, and that arose effectively from aiming that particular initiative at the right audience, the right way. Next slide, please. So in terms of the theory and putting it into practice, again, this builds on somewhat to Andrew, who has already said, you need to make sure that you are consistent within your messaging. If you can, include the motivation for action and show people the right way to behave and make it easier to do the right thing, in inverted commas, than the wrong thing. And again, back to Andrew's example, particularly around the solar panels on people's roofs, people like me doing the right thing, what's the incentive for me to engage? And that goes back to some of the sociability that Andrew was talking about. And if you look on YouTube, you can still find a number of videos that Unilever produced a few years ago. And there's some very useful content in those that takes some of the theory and expresses it in a very accessible way, in a very practical way. Next slide, please. So before you start, you need to know why people do the things that they do. You need to be very clear what the new system is going to deliver. You need to manage the transition. And you need to be clear what's the benefit for the individuals whose behavior you intend to change. That might be that they get financial reward, and there'll be a little more on that later. And Andrew's already touched on that in terms of his examples with energy efficiency in the homes. It might be that they get social benefit, that they are seen to be doing something which is deemed to be attractive by the social group of which they're a part. And on the right hand side, I'm sure all of you will have seen this advert recently that's emerged about smart meters. I guess the audience for this webinar will be very familiar with what smart meters are and why they exist. But to the general public, that might be less clear. And if you watch that advert, actually, you're not really any clearer at the end of it than you were at the beginning, what smart meters are and why they're a good idea, other than they're associated with net zero. They're a bit techy, they're a bit obscure, they kind of sit somewhere in the back of the home, and they may be presented a little bit as a silver bullet. So I will work on the assumption that this is the start of a program that isn't just a single activity. And over time, what smart meters are and how they will deliver benefit will be revealed to the public. But this links back, I think, to the nudge theory that I talked about and Andrew talked about. But this is the first activity in a sequence of unveilings around smart meters to encourage people to accept them into their homes. Next slide, please. So in terms of responses to change, I'm afraid the text on this slide is a little bit small, but this is a piece of work that was published very recently during the pandemic. The important takeaway, I guess, from this is that you've got a number of people, quite a number of people, saying there that they've reviewed their lifestyles, and as a consequence of the pandemic, they intend to take environmental claims a bit more seriously in future, and their own behaviors will change as a consequence of their experience during the pandemic. And that actually, you can see there the pie charts in the middle showing that there was a much stronger effect amongst people who already thought about such things than about those who didn't think about such things. But you can also see there was a significant shift in the proportion of people who were making those decisions or felt they would be making those decisions. On to the next slide, please. And here is a very specific example of reflecting some of those changes. This relates to food waste in the home. You can see there below the bar chart on the left the particular product types that it relates to. And again, this is energy efficiency, resource efficiency more generally. But what it shows is between November 19, pre-pandemic, and April 20, maybe at the height of the pandemic, when the lockdown had been instituted and where the medical impacts were at their most severe, a very significant reduction in domestic food waste in those product categories, almost halving. Then by July, when restrictions had eased, then there'd been a bounce back, and maybe half of that gain, or 40% of that gain, had been lost. On the right-hand side, you can see if you were to have a poll within your workforce looking at people's understanding and interest in a topic, you probably wouldn't expect to get numbers as good as that in terms of those that recognize that the topic is important and that they have a responsibility to be part of the solution. And yet, around 40% of that gain had been lost between April and July. It's too early to say quite why, but actually I suspect, and it may well be the same thought has occurred to you as well, that a return to the status quo ante in terms of people's environments meant a return to the status quo ante in terms of people's behaviors. So in terms of locking in behavior change, I think is a salutary example. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So if you're going to establish new patterns of behavior, all those things that Andrew has talked about and I've touched on over the last few slides, and on the chart on the right, you can see trends in smoking across some recent years. And it's not actually up to the minute. The 2019 data weren't available at the time that that was produced. And you can see a general downward trend in terms of smoking amongst all the nations of the UK over that period of time. No great surprise that smoking is dangerous. We've known that for decades. And even now, maybe 1 in 5 of the population is still smoking, but a downward trend. And a number of things have happened in recent years, including rather before this time, the ban on indoor smoking in hospitality establishments, which meant that the social aspect of smoking had been taken away. We've had changes to pack decoration, so branding, which again, the sort of the reward of being associated with the glamorous brand has been taken away with plain packs. Maybe an increase in on-pack messaging. Again, it's not going to tell anybody anything they don't know if they're an established smoker, that they can cause lung disease and other issues, but maybe it deters potential new smokers from starting. And also fairly recently, the change in point of sale and the fact that products are no longer displayed there behind closed screens if you go to buy cigarettes. So a number of changes happening over the course of recent years and driving behavior change in an environment where the fact that smoking is a bad behavior, as it were, medically, is no surprise. So you can still make some moves even though something is on the face of it, all the doubt has been removed. Next slide, please. So a quick example here. These are images. The one on the left was taken in July 2018. The two on the right were taken in December 2019. I'll just have my 2-minute warning. Thank you, Jane. There's more to this than I have time to talk about. But on the left, it says that coffee cups can go in the green bin, the recycling bin, and the landfill bin also contains coffee cups, presumably because some commuters at Newark Northgate believe that that coffee cups actually aren't recyclable, whatever it said on the bin. And also, perhaps very unhelpfully, the landfill black bin was also said that glass is destined for landfills. You can see also there in the center image, which possibly again confuses people, because I would suggest that glass is probably the least uncertain material for recycling in the home and beyond. Glass recycling has been available for decades in this country anyway, well before other types of material could be recycled. So the central and right-hand image, York Station, December 2019. It's the same rail organisation. This is the East Coast Main Line. And there they've changed the messaging. Firstly, they've completely inverted the messaging because coffee cups no longer are associated with the green bin, the recyclable bin. But they've added imagery, which wasn't there before, and they've added the messaging in a much clearer and more visible way on top of the green bin. and they have added some imagery there on the general waste bin. Again, perhaps slightly puzzling for consumers, in that glass we would still think to be recyclable. But anyway, they've certainly moved the messaging quite significantly in that intervening 18-month period. I've used this example a number of times, so maybe somebody from LNER was in one of the audiences. I don't think I can really take credit for it, though. Next slide. So finally, a case study here. This is very much about energy efficiency rather than general resource efficiency and messaging. This particular product has some in-cab feedback for drivers. It's aimed at fleet operators for distribution organizations, so LGVs, HGVs, vans. And the idea is that it picks up what they refer to as harsh driving, so steering, which makes the vehicle lurch around, or acceleration and braking. And the second of the blue bars on the left-hand side shows a reduction in those harsh events of around 25%, just over, as a consequence of this in-cab feedback. And you get a little light showing in the cab, red, amber, green light. If it's green, it means you are driving less harshly. If it's red, you are driving harshly. So it straight away relates some kind of gamified reward for the driver to their behavior. What it also does, whilst they're at it, is it reduces the idling time and it reduces incidents of speeding, as you can see in the other two blue bars. And the net outcome of that overall is a 5% improvement in fuel efficiency, because harsh driving also relates.
Oh, you're back, Cameron.
Yeah, sorry. Harsh driving also relates to poor fuel efficiency. There's one particular organisation I know that's implemented this type of system where they share the savings in fuel costs with the drivers. So 50% of the saving goes to drivers, 50% is kept by the company. So there is a direct reward, again, similar to some things Andrew was talking about, a direct reward for behaviour change, money in their pockets, and there's the immediate reward in cab that they can relate their behaviour to what is going to engender that cash reward. And that's a very robust combination of ways of driving change behaviours, and that persists over time as that reward persists over time. Next and final slide. Thank you for that, and I shall hand you on to the next speaker.
Okay, that's great. So if we could, if I could now invite Carol to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to take you through some slides now and show where a lot of the initiatives and approaches that Andrew and Gavin have talked about are being applied in practice. So next slide, please. The UN are officially launching their race to net zero tomorrow, 10th of October. And as you can see, this is a big global coalition, and it's building on the work that the Science Based Targets Initiative are doing. And if you click on the Science Based Targets website, you automatically get a clicker coming up, turning numbers over to show how many businesses have signed up to a formal science-based target. And so this is the creating a social contagion globally around the race to zero. And there are going to be a whole load of activities over the next year, including around 500 TED Talks, lots of organisations explaining how they're getting there, what they're doing. So they're all in a process of change management. Some are further on than others, some are just starting, but it is a global movement. So it's developing this sense of urgency and momentum. Next slide, please. So transitioning from grey to green really is about change management throughout the business. And I really liked this graphic. It's from the US Federal Energy Service, which is ironic really, considering that at a federal level there's a complete denial about climate change and the importance of getting to grips with net zero. But it shows that it is about continuous improvement, and where businesses already have these processes in place, particularly around international standards like ISO 14001 and ISO 50001, it should be relatively easy. But it's very much about looking at the business mission and net zero proofing it, and then moving into, well, what does that mean for our policies? How do we need to tweak those or change them? And then it's about implementing them. It's going through the existing procedures and processes and looking to see how they need to change, who needs to be involved to do that. So it's a very inclusive process, and it's got to cover every part of an organisation. It's important to get marketing and sales and R&D and operations and safety and personnel. It's important to get every department and division across an organisation involved in this, and look at how they are changing what's being done to improve service delivery, improve product design and product delivery in a way that really embraces the circular economy. And this also means, obviously, fully engaging with the supply chain. When you think back to the graphic that Jez showed at the beginning, that scope 3 supply chain is the bottom bit of the iceberg when it comes to net zero. Next slide, please. IKEA, owned by Inca Group, have just released their new strategy for 2020 onwards, and this is all about net zero. And they've got pages and pages of how they're doing that, but this is a really nice short summary of how they've divided it up into these 3 different strands that they're very integrated. In fact, as an example of integrating net zero into a sustainable business model, this is really excellent. And even if they're not doing it as fully as it may come across on the website, they're certainly giving it a damn good try. And I'd like to draw your attention to the little bit at the bottom that circled in green around key enablers: advocacy, co-creation and partnership, entrepreneurship and innovation, inclusiveness. That co-creation and inclusiveness bit is really important. So if we go on to the next slide. This is just an example from one of the pages on the website, and they talk about making sustainability a natural part of our everyday work, so they're normalising it. The statement there, 95% of IKEA co-workers agree with this statement. So this is saying that from top to bottom, bottom to the top, throughout our business, we've made this our mission statement. And they talk about enabling all co-workers to contribute to and actively challenge IKEA. So this is the bit about making it really inclusive and making it part of everybody's agenda at work. And interestingly, they've also made it part of what people do at home as well, enabling our co-workers to live a more sustainable life at home, using our solutions and knowledge for reducing energy, water and waste at home. And for any business out there, your employees are one of your biggest assets, and because of what they're already doing and how they're living their lives at home, it's important to try and bring all of the good practice that people naturally understand and are trying to achieve into the workplace, as well as making it work the other way. IKEA have really drawn a line in the sand by saying by 2030 our ambition is to become climate positive, not just net zero, but climate positive. And they talk about regenerating resources while growing the business. So this is getting away from the concept that to be productive and economically viable, it's difficult to be a more sustainable net zero business. It isn't. If you really embrace net zero fully, it should make your business much more secure and cost effective in the long term. Next slide, please. Coming back to this idea of co-creation, recently on a Green Buzz circularity webinar, Tim Brown, who's the chair of IDEO, said that when you're designing something new, you're creating something new, you don't do it in a back room and then suddenly launch it and it works. He was very clear about systems being designed, and that design process can take quite some time, and it's a co-creation approach throughout the business. And he's known for his design consultancy and creative design thinking. He's just published a book recently, which is a really good read. So I would strongly recommend that to you. And we're working with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine at the moment, in the news quite a lot because of the pandemic. Their head of sustainability is a really great guy to work with. He's a real facilitator and enabler, and it's very important where any organisation has a person or a team who are in charge of sustainability. It's not all down to them. It's to help their function to coordinate what's happening across the rest of the business. And the new LSHTM travel policy is a really good example of that, because when you're working with a range of very senior academics who very often, when they're successful in securing funding, the funding is in their name. It's not so much in the institution's name. So in a sense, people feel that it's within their role and their right to do as they will with resources like that. So it's got to be a really inclusive and creative process to get people on side. So they have set up a benchmarking process looking at how they're doing compared to other HEIs. So that's, you know, how normal are we, how typical are we? So that's coming back to things that Andrew and Gavin have been talking about. And then establishing that they've got quite a way to go. Instead of going away and just writing the policy and saying, you know, now we need to implement it, they're going through a process of working with the procurement team, with the head of finance, and bringing in a range of the key academics, healthy skeptics, and the people who are trying to push this agenda very strongly, and brokering a way of getting a much more user-friendly, intuitive, and manageable system in place. And it's a really good process, and they're going to come up with something that's much stronger, it's much more user-friendly, and it's going to be used. And the more people that use it, as we've heard already, the more people that are seen to be doing the right thing encourages others to do the right thing. Next slide, please. So it's very easy when you've got a CEO or a managing director or the senior management team who really get this agenda, or if they haven't got completely to grips with it, they are hearts and minds deadly serious about making it work. It's much harder when you've got an organisation where that isn't the case and you feel that you're trying to push upwards. So it's really important to focus on what really matters to your organisation and use your organisation's language to redefine what the strategy should be and start to bring in the impetus around net zero. It's important in trying to create this more inclusive co-creation environment to find out where a change is being blocked and who's blocking the changes. Is it something systematic that needs to go or be altered? Is it a particular person in a position of authority? How are you going to overcome those barriers? And it's important about reviewing the systems and the data issues where those aren't tying up together. Thinking back to the IKEA example of getting everything really integrated. How can you integrate the processes? How can you bring them together and break the silos down? And it's often very important to get to the point where you can secure a board sponsor. So you've got somebody on the top team who's speaking for you and helping you do it, and will help you to set up this co-creation process. And it's ultimately in everybody's best interests, and it will start to spark discussion. It will get people to offer up ideas, and also use the standards that you've already got in place. If you're already signed up to ISO 14001, that's an excellent place to start using that as the continuous performance improvement process to make change management really work for you. Next slide, please. And in making change happen and getting your organisation's action plan together, it's really important to prioritise the quick wins. What are the things that are going to have the biggest impact most immediately, so that you can start to broadcast why it's working and what's good about it, what the cost savings are, or why it's cost neutral, and why it's making a big difference to the to business success in a way that's almost, you know, you think this is so obvious, why haven't we done it before? And it's starting to get people to challenge the status quo and start to create that new normal. And as both Andrew and Gavin were explaining, it is really important to celebrate and reward that success, make people feel good about it, and continue that review and revise process as you go on. Next slide, please. I think we've gone backwards there. So we're about to come on to two case studies. They're very different. The first goes back to what Jez was talking about, and the importance of really getting to grips with energy efficiency around the behaviour change agenda that can have really, really big impacts. And it's about applying the energy hierarchy fully to make really substantive change. And you can do it in a very focused, targeted way with a small element of the workforce. And then the second case study that we'll cover is taking a completely different approach and looking at it from a whole organisation perspective, which uses all of the visuals and the again the intuitive and make this kind of approach the default. So I'll hand back over to Jez.
Okay, if we could go on to the next slide, please, Rob, which actually is a holding slide. So as I explained at the beginning, but if anyone was missing at the beginning of the webinar, that unfortunately Paul Garland is unable to present today. So Vodafone have announced that only senior staff can actually present. However, all the information that I'm about to try and portray is all in the public domain. And indeed, there was a press release from Vodafone today on this very subject. So I'm not sure if that's perhaps the reason for this, but nevertheless, JRP have been involved in most aspects with Vodafone over the last 5 years. So I think I'm in quite a good place to actually give you an insight into some of the things that Paul would have been saying. Very much the focus for the last, well, almost 5 years since we've been involved, was sort of a leading edge change to an energy performance contract. The FM provider to Vodafone in the UK, for the whole of the UK, were responsible for the operation and maintenance of the HVAC, lighting, etc. But there was no real incentivization for them to actually reduce energy use. And the energy performance contract that we helped to negotiate and put in place with Vodafone in terms of the style of the approach, very much has changed the focus. Originally, a 3-year agreement was put in place with quite stringent targets, which actually amounted to about £8 million over 3 years. And that period has actually now gone through. It's now in its 4th year, and it's been completely successful. It's achieved, albeit a little bit slower at the outset, but it's caught up and has actually achieved and exceeded what was trying to be achieved. And it was all through behaviour change. There was no capex involved at all in this project. And so it goes back to some of the excellent Vodafone approaches the different pillars that they have that's important to their organization. About one of them is called Planet. So it's become an outcome that's good for the business and good for the planet. Overall, in terms of a summary, it works, it's good. It's very simple in terms of its principles, and it's got complete ownership. Now, to Vodafone, reliability is very important, and we can all understand why. We perhaps wouldn't be on this call right now if it wasn't for Vodafone and similar organizations. And they recognize and have done for years that they need to sort of continually challenge and improve. And of course, their technology is constantly evolving, you know, with the new 5G, which in itself is consuming at least twice the amount of energy to actually achieve that. So they're continually managing and changing and configuring things differently. And over this period of time, a number of other things, I'm going to concentrate a little bit on the energy performance contract, but a number of other things have happened in parallel. So for quite a few years now, we helped Vodafone to actually become compliant with ISO 50001, initially in their data centers and then in other areas, and it's continuing to be rolled out. And other sort of tools that we've, you know, we haven't, we've only been a part of the journey, but we've kind of been helping along the way. But other things that where we've been involved is in terms of the production of e-learning materials through our B energy tools, and also project management tracking tools through things like Energy Activator. But certainly energy performance contracts, if done well, do help, but it's all about making sure it's optimized and that interventions will take place. So it started really by using what Vodafone already had in terms of some of the systems and certainly in terms of the FM team, but it was all about using it better. So the EPC that Vodafone have with their FM provider is perhaps an overstated word, but it's truly collaborative. It really is. They have the same objective, incentives, and they seek to maximize, improve. Another core component of their approach, and it's probably worth me just saying that although I would appear to be talking about energy, it does actually go, then the measurements are energy, but actually it goes a lot wider, and other areas beyond energy are becoming increasingly important. So it can be a great vehicle to actually enable. But one of the key other things that is part of the entire process, as designed right at the beginning, was that external verification to provide the clarity and ensure integrity of the results, and therefore the performance metrics, and ultimately what the FM gets in terms of a reward as a partial reward, with Vodafone obviously getting the lion's share. So when you look at it in terms of good for business, it's had a significant impact, and very roughly, I believe that Vodafone achieve sort of 75–80% of the actual cost savings that are there. And in terms of harm to the planet, which is one of their key measures, then it's had 100% of that impact. You know, it's very much a phrase in terms of non-consumption. As I mentioned at the beginning, don't use it in the first place. And it's we're always pressing forward the energy, but goes further than that. It's everything to do with net zero in terms of a hierarchy of lean, clean, and then green. So lean is not using it in the first place. Then the best next solution is something that's clean, because whilst a lot of people talk and green is fine, actually the real problems of the world are resources and clean air. So therefore clean is very important in terms of the hierarchy and the way that it's approached and rewarded. So some of the simple principles then of the energy performance contract is the alignment of incentives, and that's really important. The EPC supplier needs to be directly performing the interventions for it to work, and in this instance they have, and they've done it very well. And they tend to be things, there's a whole host of different things actually. The slide I started with the sort of cogwheels and saying what were the key elements, and those are actually broken down into over 140 different types of intervention. So it covers many of these interventions, but perhaps to just give something specific, you know, the control systems, it's the control systems were there, but they just weren't optimized. You know, the settings weren't actually realistic in terms of what they could be reduced to, and controlling the environment obviously is a key part and sort of backstop to control. But a key element has been sort of optimization and working with people to improve performance without sacrificing condition. I know Paul's very keen in terms of saying that such solutions should be designed for improvement and not for perfection. It does very much rely on the end user organization recognizing that it's a partnership, and they should be encouraged in effect to reward the FM provider in this case. The more they reward them, the more they're actually benefiting. But sometimes that takes a little bit of a leap of faith to actually get there. But this has worked really well. And it's a long-standing, really works well as well. So using IPMVP with external monitoring and verification is key, but at the same time, sort of pressure still needs to be applied. It won't just happen, you know. It needs managing, and there needs to be effective communications. So I think the summary is that a good energy performance contract, in the way that it's structured and delivered, is a very effective and economic energy and indeed net zero reduction lever, and it underpins the pillars that Vodafone have. So I think that would be my best summary of what Paul would have said, and I would encourage all organisations actually to look at how their non-core services are actually being provided. So thank you. Is Carol with us? And just while we've got a little bit of a wait there, thank you for the question and answers that are coming in. We are monitoring those, and we will try and pick those up at the end. So if I could now hand over to Angela from Unipart, who's got another different but another very interesting story and case study.
Good morning, it's Angela Dobbins from Unipart Logistics, and today I'm going to talk about how we use the Unipart way to increase environmental engagement to help us meet our environmental and sustainability net zero goals. Next slide, please. Next slide. So Unipart Logistics is part of Unipart Group of Companies, and today we span over manufacturing, logistics and consultancy services, and we have over 10,000 employees globally to engage in everything that we do. Next slide. So these are just some of our customers, and they cover a wide range of sectors, including automotive, technology, consumer, and more recently, healthcare, with the addition of 9 NHS supply chain sites and their fleet. Due to this diverse nature of the clients, there is really no one-size-fits-all solution to achieving net zero, and therefore it's crucial for Unipart and also our clients who are on different journeys for net zero that we have engaged teams across our business to enable us to reach our net zero goals and commitments. Next slide, please. So the Unipart Way, it's not just a set of improvement tools. It really is designed to engage all our employees across our organisation and help behavioural change. It's to motivate our staff and equip them with the skills to, you know, solve problems at their own level and create solutions that can really make a difference. We realise it's the teams working on the shop floor that understand the day-to-day processes and the problems that can help solve them. Next slide, please. So within the Unipart Way, we have 5 systems. However, employee engagement is one of them, and we see that that is the most important, because if we do not have an engaged workforce, we won't be able to achieve any of the other 5 systems. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? So the first stage of our behavioural change is really to educate our people and with the problems, and then provide them with the tools to solve them. And we do this through our internal Gate to Great programme, which is undertaken at all levels of our business, from our colleagues on the shop floor, through our managers, and all the way up to our senior leadership team and our directors. Everybody across the organisation goes on their own journey to do this. We have environmental sustainability modules at all levels, and during these modules we talk about different topics such as climate change and global megatrends and legislation, and also how as a business we affect the environment, but how also the environment can affect us as a business, and how we need to adapt our business to do that. So we also teach them to reduce how we can reduce their environmental impact at Unipart, but also at home, where obviously they can make a real difference. Next slide, please. So within the Unipart Way, we do have a set of tools that we use to help us achieve our results. This can be something simple from our visual management and our communication cells, where we are demonstrating what we are committing to and how we are committing to it, and then we can give them updates on our performance on that. Also, there's our standard operating procedures or our method statements. We have the environmental risk of that process embedded into the process, and also environmental key points. This enables our employees to understand what they have to do and why they have to do it. And it's something simple, just of where to put their waste or how to store hazardous waste correctly. This is making it easy for everybody to understand, and it doesn't become another thing to do. It becomes part of the process and day-to-day business as usual. Next slide, please. So one of our really powerful tools within the Unipart Way is called our contribution counts, or OCC. This is a great tool for behavioural change and improvement, as it pulls employees in from all different levels of the business to solve a problem, to deep dive it, and then to actually see their solutions being implemented across the business. This really motivates our staff to continually improve their processes, and this could be anything from our environmental performance to quality to health and safety to cost saving. And we also have the Unipart Way online, where all our OCC circles are uploaded to, and these can be shared across our whole business, so that if there's another team within the business that has a similar problem, they can use the same techniques that the team have used. Next slide, please. So as part of our carbon reduction journey, as Carol was saying, our Scope 3 emissions is the bottom of the iceberg for most companies. So we tasked our staff to help us try and reduce our Scope 3 emissions, as we thought that this is where they would really be able to make the difference. And using the tools and the OCC circles, these are just some of the solutions that they implemented. So on the McLaren contract, they introduced a cushion pack machine, which uses inbound waste cardboard and shreds it into pack fill material. This was removing bubble wrap from their process, but it also takes out, you know, the need for the raw materials for new packaging, the transportation of the packaging, the storage of the packaging, and then also the recycling of the packaging. So it's a great sustainable solution. One of the other ones there was that in our Cowley site, one of the team leaders was really concerned about the amount of single-use plastic that they were using for shrink wrapping products. So again, they held an OCC circle and they came up with that they could actually, on their returnable loop journeys, they could use reusable Velcro strapping. This has actually taken out 20 tonnes of shrink wrap in just this one contract per year. And it also saved over £11,000 in packaging. So not only has it got an environmental benefit, it also had a cost saving. And this was, you know, able to be spread across our divisions. Again, another one there was P1 labels, and this is our priority labels for products that are out on priority. We spent a long time looking at this, and again, it was such a simple solution. So rather than purchasing thousands of P1 labels every single year, we got the labels pre-printed to the box, or we have a P1 stamp. So again, takes out single-use plastic, takes out additional packaging, and takes out all the associated transportation of getting these delivered to our sites. We do a huge amount of reuse on site, and again, these solutions have all came from our staff, and we showcase this through visual management as well. So we have, you know, visual management walls around our business, like that can show, you know, our sustainable solutions that can then be transferred over to other areas of the business. Next slide, please. So in addition to our Gate to Great programmes, we also provide external training as well. We do have environmental champions across our sites, or green groups. This is not their full-time job. They do it, they volunteer to be our champions because they have a passion for the environment and a passion for sustainability. So to enable them to do their job better, we do give them external training as well, such as 14,001, the IEMA Foundation course, CIWM. We also hold online sustainability webinars, and we do best practice sharing seminars and visits, or we used to do visits before COVID, so we now have to do all that by video link. Again, for things like National Recycling Week or World Environment Day, we do environmental roadshows where we go around all our sites, again to educate all our staff on some of the issues that we are facing. Next slide, please. So, and again, we have to communicate to all our staff to let them know how we're doing. And we do this through a variety of different options. So we have newsletters and environmental pauses that go around our business from both, you know, a corporate level and also at site level. We have our digital notice boards that are telling all our staff how we are progressing with our environmental sustainability roadmap. and we also promote all the best practice initiatives that our staff are bringing to us and that we have been implemented. So we recognise all our staff across the business to help motivate the staff further. Next slide, please. So again, with all the great ideas, we really understand that recognition is key to this, and we do this through a variety of different methods in Unipart. We have something simple like the Friday thank you, which is just when somebody has went above and beyond, or you know, they get a Friday thank you shout out from the business, and they get something simple like a lunch voucher or a breakfast voucher just to say job well done. We have a more formal mark in action, and we are getting more and more environmental mark in action, where people have went above and beyond to implement environmental solutions into their workplace to help meet our sustainability goals. And then we have the Unipart Way Awards, and this is an annual black tie event that Unipart holds. It's for our whole company, and we have a set of different awards, one of which being environment and sustainability. And this is awarded to one of the best sites who have had the best improvement or had put in the best environmental sustainability innovation for that year that has helped us meet our goals or helped our clients meet their goals. And one site will win that. This really, you know, the environment one really helps boost the morale of our staff and everything that we're doing. And it really helps us achieve, you know, great ideas across the business. Next slide, please. Again, we use another, it's called Unipart Spark, which is basically social media, internal social media that we use. And again, we post on that, and we recognise all our colleagues when they're doing such a good job. Next slide, please. So this is just to highlight that this is all our environmental successes from 2019. I would actually love to say this is all my hard work, but obviously it's not. It's been done by all our colleagues across the whole of Unipart Logistics that have helped us have achieved these great results that we're really, really proud of. Next slide. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Angela. That was a really thorough and an excellent presentation explaining how things are working at Unipart. My job now really is to just summarise everything that you've heard this morning and try and encapsulate it in some short sound bites, and then we'll throw it open to the Q&A session. So next slide, please. And I'm using some images throughout the next set of slides just to emphasize that making things visual, again, as everybody so far has explained, is really important. And don't get frightened by the challenge of net zero. Approach it really intuitively, go with your gut instinct, and talk with everybody you work with, especially if it's a small organisation where you can get everybody together, and just talk about what needs changing. What would good look like if you woke up tomorrow and you'd achieved net zero? What would have happened? So what changes need to be made, and how can that change be made really easily? And if it's a much larger organisation, start with a good group, a cross-section of colleagues, and start to brainstorm what's the best way of recruiting, what's the best way to start getting people involved, and is there a low-hanging fruit like the Vodafone case study, or do you have the kind of organisation like Unipart where you can just plug it into the ongoing communications process? Next slide, please. So think co-creation, put that front and centre of your thinking, and build capacity across the whole organisation. Net zero and sustainability is never down to a small team of people. That small team of people can coordinate and facilitate, but ultimately it's about the entire organisation. So brainstorm the issues and opportunities at all levels using the existing processes of regular meetings and reviews, but also try and thread in some new ones just to literally draw a line in the sand and start trying to think differently. And it's not just about what you're doing internally. You can export this to your customer base. A lot of businesses use their marketing agencies to do this co-creation thing with customers. For example, Starbucks. What do customers really want when they come into a Starbucks coffee shop? What kind of experience do they want? And they have a dialogue going with customers to get feedback, and they use that for the marketing process. So it's not just about the customers, it's much broader than that, and it's trying to get a much more holistic systems-based approach to become net zero. Next slide, please. And as everybody has been saying, make it really easy. If it's too difficult, then you're not doing it in the right way. Try and make doing the right thing the default setting. Going back to the example that Andrew gave about the you're just co-opted into something where you get the message about the energy usage. And be really clear about what good looks like. Make sure there's an understanding about that amongst your internal and your external stakeholders. Make it user-friendly, attractive and normal. Think EAST. Easy, accessible, attractive, simple and timely. Next slide, please. And be really targeted. Where could you have the greatest immediate benefits? Think about the Vodafone case study. If you can do something that has an instant big hit, then it's easier to get colleagues and others to sit up and take notice. And it's also worth thinking about how you can do that with your supply chain. What do you really know about your supply chain? Start asking some very simple questions, and you might find that there's there might be some scary stories down there, but there might be some really fantastic good news stories, some big benefits that you can make part of your story because they are part of your business. So create a business case for why net zero is worth doing and integral to how you do your business, and make it really compelling, but using your organization's language and goals. Make it part of what you're already doing. Make it part of your organization, and really get as many ideas as you can from everybody across the organization. Next slide, please. And make it fun. There's obviously a lot of fun out there with Unipart, with the examples that we've heard from elsewhere. Celebrate the wins, share out the rewards, make everybody feel that they're part of something really good and it's all going in the right direction, and broadcast the successes. Spread that contagion around net zero, and then it will, the pennies will start to drop. Others will start to see how they fit into it, what they can do, and where further efforts can be made, so that we're all moving in the right direction. Next slide, please. Oh, that's a slow change. So this is all about keep going. It really is an essential journey. The former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has said that net zero is one of the greatest business opportunities of our time. He's also said if organisations don't get to grips with net zero in the next 10 years, they may cease to exist. They may go out of business. So it's about making this dynamic process of change management absolutely integral to how you operate. And it's about building it into your beliefs and value systems, your mission statement. and to be very clear about that from top down to bottom and bottom up. Next slide, please. And I'll hand back to Jez for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Carol. That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So we've had some good questions and answers in on the chat, and I'll answer the first one that I've got, which is one at the bottom, which is one from Tim, which was actually my Vodafone example, who asked the question, can I give some examples of simple behaviour changes that delivered good savings at Vodafone? And I give you a slither of those, because there are actually many. So as an example, looking at heating systems, what temperature were those spaces heated to? And it came down to resetting policies, looking at what was required, and therefore optimizing the temperature. So heating temperatures were set to 20 degrees, or some cases 21, according to what was required. In terms of air conditioning temperatures, these were all previously set at around 20 or 21, but actually that's much too cold. It uses more energy to cool to a lower temperature, and 24 degrees centigrade air conditioned feels the same as 19 degrees on heating. So air conditioning temperatures were set to 24 degrees centigrade. I've noted a number of others up here. So the same goes for things like lighting, in terms of the lighting levels, the times of the on, energy suggestions, sort of ownership by the FM actually was a key part. Specific bits of Vodafone, like data centers, actually have other considerations in addition to the temperature, because it's longevity of equipment. So optimizing those conditions. Many different types of interventions, but hopefully that just gives you half a dozen or so. So some of the other questions that have come through. I think Andrew, I don't know if you want to respond. I know you've responded back to Daisy about good starting points for books and films, but perhaps it's worth just widening that to the rest of as a quick feedback.
Yeah, the books I gave were just the classics, really, between Nudge and Thinking Fast and Slow. And then I dropped in a couple sort of more BIT focused books as well. One thing I didn't say is that BIT's blog is maybe a nice place to start as well for a few concrete sort of like project updates that incorporate behavioral insights.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Gavin, you were in some discussions with across the chat with Sarah. I think perhaps it'd be helpful just to briefly explain and widen that to everybody in case they didn't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'm just in the midst of typing the next 100-word missive to Sarah. But essentially, Sarah's question was around engagement for smaller organisations where there may not be the resource or other capacity to engage, and where policy tends to leave them out. Because when you think about, let's say, SECR, for instance, as one of the more recent government initiatives, numerically, there's a huge number of businesses not captured by that, even if in total value terms, the companies which are captured by it might be dominant economically, that misses out all sorts of smaller and micro organizations. So what's the key to engaging companies of that scale? And we're talking about trying to find the drivers which resonate. And I suggested one of those drivers might be actually appealing to people as private citizens rather than as businesses. So if you are a plumber, for instance, then you may care more about the world your children will inhabit than you might do about some abstract view of corporate structure. So getting into that, finding policy levers, advocating for positive policy change, and providing resources to help smaller organizations so they don't have to keep reinventing wheels.
Great, thank you, Gavin. And Angela, there's a question has come through for yourself. It says that it's great learning more about your sustainability journey. Could you tell us how many colleagues are in your team?
Yeah, so we've actually got a really small team at Unipark. So as far as like environmental and sustainability actual managers goes, there's only myself and another who is our group environment manager, and he covers our rail and manufacturing divisions, and I'll do Unipark logistics. So it is quite a small team, and we're more or less more of a support function to support all our environmental champions across the business and across the sites. So the way it is at Unipark is it's not my responsibility, it's basically the site's responsibility to improve their environmental performance and reduce their CO2 emissions. And we'll give them, you know, a guidance on how to do that. So again, it's the same for our ISO certifications. We have ISO auditors across the business. It's not their main role within Unipark. There will be team leaders or operational managers, but again, they have an interest in being an auditor as well. So they do that as part of their role within Unipark. And I appreciate that's probably easy for us to do because we are such a big organisation and we do have a lot of resources around the business. So it might be a lot more difficult for smaller organisations to have that resource.
Yes, thank you. And I'd just add on a more general basis, from experience of delivering behaviour change projects, is that it is much easier to deliver a behaviour change project where a system such as ISO 50001 or ISO 14001 are actually in place. I don't know if you'd concur with that, Angela. It's kind of it's really an enabler.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's the same with using the Unipark Way. The Unipark Way is our, you know, it is our management system. And again, it's just about adapting those tools to, you know, to improve to use whatever you're doing, be it your quality management system, your environmental management system. And but yeah, with that there, if that's already installed, it's already ingrained in the business, you've already got buy-in from your senior leaders. They can kind of see the benefit of it, and they understand the kind of risks of not doing this. And for me, I feel that the carbon reduction project across Unipark was an easy sell, to be honest, because we have been on 14001 for such a long time, and the business really understands that if we don't move our business to net zero, that it will have significant impacts on the business and on our clients.
Yeah, thank you. A few more questions have come in. From John. Probably the best webinar I've seen today. Oh, that's very kind of you to say so. Your question: how do we change people's perception of office temperature, i.e. too hot or too cold? It's without making it sound too simple, I think it's about it's down to education or training or realization. It's that type of thing. I mean, it's the way you do it, really, and I probably haven't got time to answer that, but that would be my quick answer. We've got a question from someone. In manufacturing, what are the ways to achieve net zero from the point of natural gas and electricity consumption? Well, again, perhaps that deserves a much more detailed answer as well. But clearly, in terms of natural gas, some alternative ideally needs to be found ultimately. Or, of course, there's offsetting, which I don't know if, Carol, you want to just talk briefly about?
I know there's a lot of debate around the pros and cons of offsetting, but if you've done absolutely everything you can do to reduce your emissions for the last reporting year, and you've got residual emissions left over that you cannot reduce any further at the moment, then there are very credible ways of offsetting those emissions. And if you go for something like a gold standard program or specific type of project that fits with your business as well, there are a whole range of project programs available in the UK or overseas, and the gold standard particularly are now working in applying the Sustainable Development Goals, so that you're getting environmental justice, I suppose, with social benefits, looking at alleviating gender differences, improving education. So something really simple could be investing in a new school or a new hospital building that otherwise wouldn't happen, and that new development is low to zero carbon. So
great. Thank you for that. I was just going to say, Carol, we're actually now out of time. We will take all of your questions. We'll reiterate those that we've already answered, and we'll extend to those that we haven't currently answered. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for your kind comments, and have a good rest of Friday. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, Rick.
Bye-bye.
Bye.